Hello there! Welcome to Skeleton Key Productions. I'm Crown Gray's Cocon. Let's get into the video. Today's video we're asking the question of what if Quebec became independent? Now the idea for this video was not my own, I have to admit. It was someone in one of the comment sections in one of my videos. However, because I get so many comments and because me very small brain and I forgot to write down who actually wrote the thing, if this is your idea, please just write in the comment section. If you're watching, write in the comment section, this is my video idea, right? So in the next few months, I'm coming to the end of my alternative history series. So basically, if you have any ideas for alternative history scenarios, get these ideas in now. You don't want the boat to sail because after a few months, that's just gonna be it. So if you don't wanna miss out on that. Right, now that we've got all of that out of the way, now we can actually focus on the history of this video, right? So Quebec, for those who don't know, is a region of Canada which is French-speaking and predominantly Catholic. Now the reason why it's French-speaking and predominantly Catholic, or the rest of it is English-speaking and predominantly Protestant, is as a legacy of the 7 Years' War. So France had control of what was then called New France. So this is basically all the Louisiana territory, going from the state of Louisiana all the way up to Quebec in the north. We've covered this in a previous video on the Louisiana Purchase, so definitely check that out. But just for those who haven't seen that video and are unaware of the history, what ended up happening is you end up having the 7 Years' War, right? Which is a massive global war. Churchill referred to it as being like the First World War. And what ended up happening in that one, with regard to this context, is that the British kicked the French out of Canada. And while the rest of their colonies weren't very heavily populated, in Quebec you had a lot of French settlers who had moved in there. And these French settlers didn't want to go back to France and they didn't want to go anywhere else, right? So they decided that they were going to stay there. And this kind of led to a problem for the British here, because it's like, how do we assimilate people who don't want to be assimilated? And so obviously for a long time there was a lot of persecution towards the Catholics and towards like the French speakers, trying to crack down their language and their faith. However, as time went on, they got more and more autonomy, and so a lot of the societal structures which had existed beforehand, they were allowed to continue. However, because Quebec was governed very differently from the rest of the provinces, it's meant that as time's gone on, it has evolved in a very different way from the rest of Canada, with the official language in the rest of Canada being English and the official language in Quebec being French. So these differences led to a great degree of separatism. So especially in the mid-1970s, you had the rise of the Parti Québécois. My pronunciation of French is still terrible. For those who've seen this channel for a long time, you know I can't pronounce French things, right? So the Parti Québécois, or the Quebec Party, basically, they came to prominence in the 1976 election, and in 1980 they pushed there to be a referendum, right? So this was the first referendum on Quebec independence, and they lost at 40% to 60%. However, a generation later, you had the referendum in 1995. Now, this referendum was not a clear-cut thing, right? On screen now is what the actual text of the referendum was, and as you can see now, it doesn't necessarily lead Quebec to become independent. Although obviously a lot of people who were pushing for Quebec to become independent would have taken a victory in this referendum as a clear sign that Quebec ought to become independent. And this vote was very, very narrow, right? So in the last one, the turnout was, from the top of my head, about 80%, which is kind of what you'd expect in a lot of like kind of referendums, about 70% round like 80%. However, for this one, it ended up going all the way up to 93.5%. So almost everyone and their mum turned up to this referendum to vote on it. And the result was very, very narrow, right? It's incredibly narrow, less than 1 percentage point, right? So the result was 49.42% for yes, and it was 50.58% for no. And the gap between the yes and no campaign was just 54,288. So if, say, for instance, 28,000 people who voted no decided to vote yes, well then the result would have been completely different. So that's basically what we're going to go on with this timeline. Yeah, we're going to imagine that 28,000 people who voted no decided to vote yes. So a yes victory in this case is not a clear-cut thing, and that's for two reasons. One, as I said, the question itself is very complicated and doesn't necessarily lead to it. And second of all, At that time in 1995, it wasn't even clear whether under Canada's constitution it was constitutionally allowed for provinces to break off. So it wasn't until the Clarity Act of 1999, which basically said that states had a right to secede from the Canadian Federation, right? So up until 1999, the issue of whether a state could even leave, it was still up in the air. So for instance, in America, states cannot leave, and that's, it's unconstitutional for a state to secede from the Union. However, in Canada, it was later decided that they could, but in 1995, that was not a clear-cut thing. It was certainly not certain at that point. And so this video is going to kind of skirt around all the complex politics of that, because whether like they would have taken action on it, it's all very confusing. So just for the sake of this argument, we're going to assume that they managed to get their independence from the rest of Canada. So what would have been the effects of this? Well, Quebec makes up about 20% of Canada's economy. However, it makes up about 23% of its overall population. Now, as we've discussed in previous videos about what if Scotland became independent, etc., etc., so definitely check those videos out, right, just for a bit of reference. But if you've not seen those videos, and you really ought to, right, if you've not seen them, then what you need to understand is this. If a region of a country wants to split away, if its share of population is larger than its share of the economy of said nation, then that means that it's a net recipient of government funds, right? So what I mean by that is this, very simple terms. Catalonia in Spain, its population is smaller than its share of the economy. So Catalonia is a net contributor to the Spanish government, right? So it gives more than it receives. However, Quebec in this case receives more money from the Canadian government than it gives back, right? So it's a net recipient rather than a net contributor to the Canadian government, which means that if they were to become independent, much as is the case with Scotland wanting to become independent from the UK, in the short term at least, they'd have to account for this deficit because, they'd be used to receiving all this extra money, but obviously if they got independence, then this money would run out, right? So they then have to either cut for spending or they'd have to raise taxes in some other way. So this is something to kind of bear in mind, that at very least in the short term, Quebec would be at a disadvantage in fiscal matters. But how would this affect the rest of Canada? Well, on two fronts, First of all, Canada is at the moment the second largest country on Earth in terms of area. However, with the loss of Quebec, it would go from second place to fifth place, So its land area would be smaller than that of Brazil. So that's quite a full of prestige for Canada. And then also obviously in terms of its economy as well, So even though it is a net recipient of Canadian funds, it still obviously contributes 20% of its economy, which means that obviously Canada's economy would be 20% smaller. So that's something to kind of bear in mind. Canada would fall down in the league tables for all these different kind of measurements. But on a political level, Quebec leaving would have huge ramifications for Canada, because as you can see on the map here, obviously, you have the western provinces, which are English speaking, and then you have some of the coastal ones, which are also English speaking. And right in the middle, you obviously have Quebec. So Canada in its entirety, would no longer be a kind of contiguous landmass, right? It would be a country split between the west and the east. And even within our own timeline, the province of Saskatchewan, I don't know how to pronounce that. Sorry, it's on screen now. Saskatchewan, whatever it's called. That region of Canada wanted to split away from the rest of Canada. So if Quebec end up getting its independence, then this state would have pushed for independence from the rest of Canada, because these are western provinces, they tend to be more conservative than the rest of Canada. And so if Quebec got its independence, they would have really pushed for that as well. And so the government of Canada was kind of faced with the situation of, if Quebec leaves, there was a chance of three different scenarios. One, in which these provinces all split off and become independent themselves. Two, in which they kind of set up a separate union and they end up setting up their own kind of country as such, And three, some of these provinces wanted to join the United States, Now, some of these are quite unfeasible as well. I think probably more likely what would have happened is that they would have come together and actually kind of like unified and stuff and formed some sort of like mini Canada basically, which is a bit like conservative than like the rest of Canada. And then obviously the provinces on the east coast, I think they would have kind of formed their own little kind of new country as well. So potentially Canada would have been split kind of 4 ways, because then obviously we have to account for the territories in the north, which are mainly made up of like native people and stuff. And these provinces, again, they probably would have wanted to get their independence as well, because you know, if everyone's all splitting off anyway, like we may as well all have our own like independence. So if Quebec had got its independence, Canada likely would have fragmented into about 4 different pieces at least, which is kind of something we kind of don't really think about, because Canada is largely a stable country. Its borders are relatively stable. So yeah, this would have completely changed a lot of things about how we view the world. But how would the rest of the world have seen this? So first of all, the Queen would no longer be the head of state in Quebec, because obviously, you know, they don't want anything to do with the British anyway. So like, yeah, that would just never happen. And so while she probably still would have remained head of state in the other provinces, yeah, this certainly would have happened with Quebec. On top of that, America was a bit on the fence and was largely opposed to Quebec getting its independence, because obviously Canada is a member of NATO and like, you know, they have very strong alliances and stuff, and they didn't want the weakening of one of their major partners. And then on top of that, many other countries around the world would have not wanted to recognise Quebec, because countries like Spain, which have like, you know, the Catalonian independence movement, etc., countries with kind of their own separatist movements wouldn't have wanted to support it, because it would have encouraged nationalism within their own countries. So the first few years of Quebec being independent, you would have had, you know, alliance with France, because like obviously the French really pushed for Quebec to become independent, and that's kind of it. Like, yeah, they probably would have got recognition at some point, but yeah, it would have been quite difficult in the first early years. And then as we can see now with regard to public opinion, at the moment, support for Quebec independence is at just 32% to 56%, right? So this kind of shows that actually, while you had kind of flare-ups in the 80s and in the mid-90s, actually long term, the kind of movement for Quebec independence has kind of died down a bit, because it's quite difficult to portray them as being an oppressed minority when actually they've kind of been given all their rights and all the autonomy that they realistically want. So yeah, it's a bit complicated really. Yeah, I think kind of obviously Quebec could get independence if we wanted to. It would be able to survive as its own country, and in the long run it would be fine, but at the moment it doesn't really make that much economic sense for them. And in the first few years they would definitely struggle on the world stage to find their feet. So with all that being said, I hope that you really enjoyed that video. The next video is going to be another request which people have made. This time I actually have remembered the name of the person. Actually, what's their name again? Damn it. I'll write it, I'll have it written down. Don't worry. I swear I'll have it written down. Anyway, the next video is going to be on what if the nullification crisis started the American Civil War. So that sounds a little bit wordy, but the nullification crisis of 1832, this is to do with Andrew Jackson and John C. Calhoun. So basically, yeah, there was a big argument with regard to tariffs and slavery and yeah, all that kind of stuff. And South Carolina almost split away from the Union. And basically, a lot of the issues that are there are kind of a prelude to the later Civil War. So definitely stay tuned for that video. And then like the video after that is going to be another request made by the same person, which is going to be on what if Abraham Lincoln was assassinated earlier during the Civil War. So yeah, so that's what we're kind of doing. Like I said, we're kind of covering all the kind of suggestions that people make. So if they're good suggestions, yeah, I will definitely do a video on them. So in the meantime, have a great day and bye. Oh, and don't forget as well, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with people as well. You know what, actually, if each person who watches this could find one person, I'm sure some of you have some friends, sure you must have some friends, share it with just one person, yeah, that will help the channel out a lot. You don't even, you know, it costs you nothing, just hit the like button and then share with one other person who you think might be interested in one of my videos, right? Yeah, that will definitely help me out a lot. And subscribe if you haven't subscribed already, and yeah. So with that actually being said, have a great day and bye.